the same thing that would need to be true for a firm to go through a transition is this very same thing that would need to be true for a firm owner to experience freedom in their day-to-day of the practice. You can be a lot more wealthy by working together with other people on a shared common goal.
There's a lot of freedom with a good transition for you to design whatever role you want to have.
Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. Today's episode is all about how to avoid the mistakes that sabotage a firm ownership transition. Today, I sit down with Business of Architecture principal Ryan Willard, and we discuss why some small architecture firm transitions fail while others succeed. This episode is for you if you've built a firm and you're wondering what to do now that you're approaching retirement, or perhaps you work at a firm where the owner is approaching retirement and may have even approached you about ownership. Well, if you've built a firm and you'd like to have it continue and even walk away with perhaps a paycheck, this episode is for you. On today's episode, you'll discover the silent killer of firm transitions that turns thriving practices into ghost towns and how to sidestep them like a pro. Why doing good architecture isn't enough when you're handing over your firm, and the business fluency your successors must have, as well as the single biggest mistake firm owners make when they think transition means numbers, not people, and what to do instead.
Today's episode is sponsored by Gelt. Is your architecture firm just filing taxes or actually using them to grow the business? Gelt is your partner in optimizing your taxes so you can focus on scale. They work with you year-round, not just at tax time, taking a proactive approach that combines expert CPAs and powerful technology. From smart entity structures to overlooked deductions and smarter compensation planning, Gelt helps architecture firms unlock strategies most accountants miss. And exclusively for Business of Architecture listeners, Gelt is offering 10% off your first year. Don't wait for next tax season. Schedule your complimentary consultation at joingelt.com. That's JOINGELT.com to learn more and mention BOA when you sign up.
Today's episode is brought to you by Smart Practice. If you're building everyone else's dreams as a firm owner while yours collect dust, it's time for the Smart Practice Method Masterclass. This is your free masterclass that gives you a blueprint for eliminating overwhelm and slaying the chaos in your architectural practice. You'll discover the number one practice operating systems and be able to stop drawing up excuses and start designing your ideal practice today. Go to smartpracticemethod.com to get access to this free training video specifically for podcast listeners. All right, today's episode is all about avoiding those unseen critical mistakes that sabotage ownership transition plans.
Ownership transition, Ryan, when we use these two words, what are we talking about?
This is the wonderful process of creating legacy, creating new leaders in the firm, handing over the keys to the car, if you like, creating the new captain. It's the retirement plan for some architects, and it's one of these parts. It's a major milestone in any architect's life, and quite an accomplishment. And I think something that we see and hear lots of firm owners dealing with, and often very successful firm owners. They've built a really great practice, and now they're looking to hand it over to the next generation of stewards. And it's a process it can be done very badly and can really rock and destabilize an otherwise good business. There are firms that can do it really well. I mean, interestingly, I spoke with the Smith Group, the two of the three managing partners of the Smith Group a few weeks ago, and they're
The top
a firm,
dogs.
Yeah, they've been around for, I can't remember off the top of my head, 125 years.
That
Something
long?
like that.
Wow.
Yeah, something like that, or maybe even longer. They said they've been around since one of the civil wars in the US.
That's it. It says 1853. That's got to be, I don't know if we'll have to ask the listeners, do you know a firm that's been around longer than since 1853?
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. Ryan, I found this. Enamored with architecture, our founder, Sheldon Smith, pursued unique design opportunities throughout the 1800s that has carried our firm forward for 170 years. So that's off of the
170,
Smith Group profile.
Extraordinary.
That
But
is.
there are, that's a great example. And we'll talk more about that as a kind of case study and some of the things that they do really well. And we'll talk about some of our clients who have, you know, we've seen many firms go through this process. Sometimes we've been contacted by, um, you know, one scenario that we often get people reaching out to us is there's a group of new firm owners. Okay, so usually young architects in their sort of mid-30s to early 40s. They've just bought into the business, or they've been gifted a kind of small chunk of equity of the firm, and then they're buying out the rest of their planned ownership through deferred compensation or deferred profit scheme from the previous owner. And often we see that younger generation kind of starting to take the reins of the firm, and they start asking a lot of questions, like, where's the profit? How do the finances work? What does it mean to be a partner of a business? What is the business of architecture? And this can often be a point of friction, worry, concern for the firm owners. Um, and, sometimes there are not illegal practices, but maybe a lack of financial hygiene in the business, and lots of personal expenses being run through the firm, and, things that might have made kind of tax sense when you were a small sole trader or only had a couple of people, but now as a sort of mature business, it's not really a healthy way to be running a firm. And then as soon as you bring on new partners, there's this new level of transparency with the finances, and more questions start getting asked. And it's a very interesting process. But I think if we kind of outline perhaps some overarching problems that we've seen, we could start off with just the simple one, the first one, that for a lot of firm owners, just simply letting go and handing over the reins and having the trust to be able to do that is really difficult. Really, really difficult. So difficulty in relinquishing control, micromanaging after handing over, a lack of trust. This might sound bizarre, but actually a lack of trust with the incoming leadership about their ability to do the job. And often the incoming leadership has, if they've been micromanaged their whole lives, they have a lack of trust in themselves. And the firm owner doesn't really know. It's a lot of unconscious competence, right? They don't actually know what it was that they were doing to bring in work. They don't actually know what it was they were doing to manage the finances. They don't actually know a lot of these kind of communication things that they were doing with their firm, which can cause a lot of issues.
Yeah, Mark was talking about that very idea today, Ryan, on one of the calls, one of our courageous smart practice firm owners, and talking about this idea of unconscious competence. And recently he had the opportunity to teach someone, I don't know if it was that recently, it was probably a while ago, had the opportunity to teach one of his family members how to drive a manual transmission, the old stick shift, and talking about how as he did that, he suddenly realized that he couldn't explain easily the steps that were needed because, like you say, he was unconsciously competent. In other words, he learned it so well. It was muscle memory. He didn't have a step-by-step process or plan to be able to do that. And it's really interesting because I remember that's what perplexed me way back in 2012 when I first started the Business of Architecture podcast, as I began to interview architects that had what I would call the trappings of success, the nice projects, seem to be making good money, seem to be getting the awards and acknowledgments and accolades, and have consistent projects coming in. I'd ask them, how did you do this? How did you achieve it? And you can go back and listen to podcast episode after podcast episode. And really, they gave very vague answers. And what I began to understand is, and as I began to dig and try to dig in more, well, what do you mean by that? Or how exactly did that occur? Eventually they would get to, well, I'm just not sure. I just kind of did good work and things came along. And to me, I just understood, I began to understand it was just like you said, it was this idea of unconscious competence, meaning that they were competent in the area. It ended up happening, and they never had to teach it to someone else. They never had to break it down into a step-by-step process or a system or something that could be transmitted to other people, which was a great opportunity for us and what we do here, because ultimately that's what we do. We take the entire business of architecture, and our goal, or what we try to do, is to really break it down into bite-sized pieces, achievable steps, so that people can understand it and, more importantly, apply it, because not all of us are unconsciously competent in these certain areas. I'll make the assertion, Ryan, that the same thing that would need to be true for a firm to go through a transition is this very same thing that would need to be true for a firm owner to experience freedom in their day-to-day of the practice. So it's kind of a cool way we can look at both of these, that yes, transition is about moving on, handing over the reins. As you mentioned, trust is a huge thing. It's very interesting that you brought up the idea of trust. That really, and that's a difficult thing to do as a business owner. You mentioned, and so here's the conversation that business owners are probably having even as they're listening to this. There are pros and there are cons. There are pluses and there are minuses to giving away equity in your firm, to bringing on additional partners. Some of the cons are, well, you're gonna have to rearrange the financial structure. You're gonna have to figure out, in the past as a solo architect, one of the advantages is you can run a lot of personal expenses straight through the books. You don't need to account to anyone. You don't need to explain to anyone. As long as it makes sense for the IRS, so your taxing jurisdiction, then it's all good. Now, you bring a partner into the mix, things get suddenly more complicated. You're going to have to look at a different structure. It can be done, but it's not as simple. It's not as easy. So these are questions that firm owners maybe are consciously making, or maybe they're just unconsciously making, and they're defaulting to the default future, which the default future is we keep on doing what we're doing now, we're going to get the same result. So a lot of times the lack of transition or the lack of freedom in a firm happens because we just continue to operate the way we have in the past, because putting into place a new result takes new energy, new direction, new decisions, new actions, and that's the hardest part. It's like getting the spaceship to lift off through the atmosphere is the hardest part. You know, that first mile, it's burning so much fuel.
A transition plan really is an exercise in business fluency as well. And, you're now kind of enrolling a new group of people to be running the business without you being involved in it. And this is what we start to see, can the business run without you? Is it possible? Okay, so you have a lot of unconscious competence, or you have a lot of micromanaging, or the kind of bottleneck scenario where you've got the firm owner who historically has been the most experienced architect in the business. They've never built more talented people around them, and we see that a lot. And obviously that has its own problems, because then, but if you're always the most experienced person in the firm, then you become the bottleneck or the expertise that's brought into all of the problems or quandaries of the practice. And if there's no, you're not that clear on your own business fluency, then trying to explain what's going on without someone else becomes problematic. And then you get the new leaders starting to ask lots of questions, and often they're not business fluent themselves. And in many cases, that, the worst case scenario is when you have one, let's call it ignorant business owner, handing over a business to more ignorant business owners, and that original owner was the source of the work, and they disappear, and all of a sudden the work dries up, and you've got a leadership team, and they never even were conscious that bringing in work was something that they had to go and do. And it can be very problematic. Or sometimes we see another kind of more broader problem we see is leadership and vision alignment not fitting together. You might see new young leaders coming into the firm, and then they've got lots of ideas, and then all of a sudden the old owner was like, well, that's not what I wanted. Or they have a different way that they were expecting the business to be led, and that kind of transition can be very disruptive and can change the strategic direction of the firm, or there can be a conflict with the firm culture, which can arise and cause a lot of issues internally.
That's a very interesting idea, Ryan, especially when we look at the idea of attachment to an identity.
Mm.
Let's have a look at that. So attachment to identity is the idea that I am a certain person, I have certain attributes, I have certain likes and wants. So we begin to self-identify and define who we are based upon our preferences, based upon the clothes we wear, where we live, the language we speak, the church we go to, our beliefs about God, how many kids we have, or maybe we don't have kids, sexual orientation, everything in between, how we identify with ourselves. And what's interesting about that is as a firm owner, we can, when we're very attached to, and we mix up our identity with the firm, it can make it a lot more difficult for other people to come in and bring their ideas and their flavor, because now it feels like an attack on how we identify ourselves, an attack on our own identity, because we've conflated the two. We've conflated who we are or who we identify to be with the practice. And there's obviously nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a choice. And it's important to understand the distinction between this choice and what it actually means. The Harvard Business Review talks about the idea between being king or wealthy, and that founders often have to make this decision. Do you want to be the king? Meaning, do you want to be the one who dictates the vision, who says, this is the culture, this is how things are? And what's end up going to happen there usually is that your brightest people, they want to shine, they want to contribute, they want to be part of the conversation. And if there's no space for them to do that, well, they're going to go find someplace else to do it. Now, on the other hand, if you want to be quote unquote wealthy, then you can be a lot more wealthy by working together with other people on a shared common goal, typically, as opposed to trying to do everything yourself. So again, it's challenging. It's difficult. These are hard questions and hard decisions that firm owners have to make. And it can feel, so I want to speak to the reality, Ryan, that it can feel very threatening, like in a very real sense, as you mentioned earlier, the trust factor, to give away equity. Because what is that? Now I'm married to this person, basically. We've done a contractual agreement where if this person, my life and my future is partially in this person's hands, that can be very scary to the human ego, to our desire for safety and security.
Yeah, and it is like a marriage, and it's a decision that needs to be, thoroughly thought about, and there needs to be, certainly if there's going to be co-leadership for any duration of time, there does need to be that leadership and vision alignment. Otherwise, it becomes a very difficult scenario. I'm reminded of one of our clients who they serve, ultra high net worth individuals, and they love it. They love that work. The business is incredibly successful. They do beautiful work, and they had, they were identifying certain people for leadership positions or becoming partner position. And as that one of the kind of younger members of the team, or a kind of more junior leader, kind of was stepping up to the plate to kind of potentially become a partner, it became very clear that there was a lack of alignment in terms of where this person wanted to go, and this person wanted to do projects that perhaps were more, social housing orientated or affordable housing orientated, or more, perhaps they had their own agenda with sustainability. And so that there becomes a very kind of pronounced tension with like, well, you know, that's not what the firm is. And it's interesting that kind of thing can arise when you've got somebody, they've been there in the firm for a long period of time, and then when they kind of get a sense of leadership, they want to do such a U-turn in the company. So that kind of thing needs to be managed, and the idea of leadership or stepping up into partnership can bring those sorts of things to the surface. And if there is a lack of alignment, it's better to kind of discover that as soon as possible, rather than marrying each other and then realizing that your values are really pulling in the opposite direction, because that would have been a very destructive situation if they'd gone forward with that kind of partnership and you had two people really pulling in opposite directions. It's like driving with the handbrake on. So leadership and vision alignment, I think, are really crucial things, and it's important for you as the business owner and leader to have a vision of where you want to go, and then that you're constantly inviting other people in to be contributors to what that vision, and that there's a kind of mix between you being open to new versions of this vision, but at the same time, there might be pieces of integrity or legacy or core values that you think are very important for the business to follow on. And then once you're gone, so it doesn't really matter. One of the other risks, if you like, might be a more practical piece, which is client and project continuity. So this is an interesting one that we see with incoming new firm owners. Is you've got are the clients going to feel uncertain, or would the clients that have been clients for a long period of time, will they abandon the firm if there's a leadership change that isn't communicated well? On a similar sort of note, how is work being won? Right. And I think for a lot of new partners into a firm, I think what's very misleading is that, number one, not everybody is cut out to be a partner of an architecture firm, and they shouldn't be. It's not for everyone. It's a different skill set. Perhaps if you just want to be an architect and go deep into a particular niche of architecture, then maybe working for somebody else in a bigger firm that might satisfy you more. But being a partner in a firm, typically we say that there's a kind of number of domains of competency that we would want to be seeing. The first being winning work. How is work getting won? The second being obviously the doing the work. We don't normally have too much of a problem with that one in architecture because everyone's been trained for such a long period of time. And usually people are being chosen to be a partner on the basis of how well they can do architecture, which we're going to come back to that. And that's a bit of a problem because it's not necessarily the defining characteristic. But as being a partner, you do need to have an understanding of how to do the work and do it well. The third is supporting the work. So that's an understanding of all the systems and processes that are ancillary to the architectural design process that actually support and ensure that the service element of architecture business is profitable. So this might include anything to do with legal, with HR, so your hiring processes, the ability to build teams. We look at a lot of systems and processes around managing and tracking profit, and having those documented in a way that other people can pick up these systems and use them without you having to necessarily be there. Other pieces might include IT and those sorts of systems. Okay, so your finances, your profits, your bookkeeping, your accounting, all that world of the supporting the work needs to have some level of documentation and process element to it, and that you as the partner or leader you don't need to be the one who's managing and doing all the details of these systems, but you need to be able to utilize them so that you can identify trends and identify which bits of the business aren't working as well as they should be, and so that you can make a strategic decision about improving them and improving the efficiency. We like to have the idea that the CEO or a partner of an architecture firm can be someone who's got a dashboard like a music producer, and they're kind of gently tweaking knobs and getting the orchestration of the music just humming right and and making everything efficient. The other kind of magical component domain is the entrepreneurial spirit. And so this is having a vision of where you want to take the firm, identifying new opportunities and sectors, and being able to communicate and enroll the rest of the team into following that vision for the future, and also having a stomach for risk. So actually being able to, jump in and take a risk without analysis paralysis and have people follow you along. So those sort of four domains are the things that we encourage partners to have at least some core level of competency in all of them. And probably the biggest one that's always missing is the winning work one. That's the first one that comes up. If the current business owner disappeared tomorrow, you've got some long lasting clients, and then what?
And the firm is at risk. Ryan, problem number 5 that we should talk about is what happens, or sometimes we see that firm owners try to thrust leadership upon people. So the owner is anxious for this person to take on more responsibility, to grow in leadership capacity. And so they say, hey, and we've seen this numerous times, they start entering into conversations with this employee, trying to give them incentives, trying to think, should I use the carrot or the stick here? How do I get them to take on more responsibility, more leadership? I want them to rise. I want them to do more. How do I do that? And oftentimes the danger here is it can feel like you're trying to pull a reticent person forward when that person, they really don't want the additional leadership. It wasn't their idea. And so this is one of the dangers as well that we see oftentimes with small firm owners, and it's easy to get frustrated because you're like, wow, why isn't I'm offering this employee part of my business? I'm offering them ownership ability, partnership ability, and they're resisting or they're not moving forward with it. And it can get very frustrating for the firm owner when they're like, why is this person not stepping up to the plate to this amazing opportunity that they have? So this is another danger or pitfall that can happen is we need to be very, very cautious not to try to thrust the leadership upon people who, number one, aren't ready for it, or number two, frankly, just don't want it.
Yeah, I think it's important as well for the business owner to be clear on what their intentions are when they're offering people ownership in their firms. Because it's not always necessarily about legacy. Sometimes we see firm owners offering equity in the business as a way of, out of fear of that person leaving.
Or increasing performance.
Yeah, or as an incentive. And it doesn't always, owning that bit of the firm comes with its own responsibilities. There's rewards to it, and often the rewards aren't even clear. And particularly when there's a poor performing business, it's kind of like the problems outweigh the rewards of actually owning it, and it's more of a liability than it is an asset. I think and that kind of leads on as well, actually, is that one of the other things that often doesn't get done very well is the whole valuation process. So actually determining a firm's value can actually be quite complex. It can be a bit of a back of the napkin sketch idea calculation. Again, there are sort of lots of methodologies that CPAs and business brokers will use to determine a firm's value. And often we see that process not being done very well, or there's a lack of agreement around it, or, we worked with a firm years ago and their new partners had bought into the firm and they were on a deferred payment scheme buying out the previous owner. And it wasn't until kind of COVID came along and disrupted cash flow that these payments to the owner kind of stopped. And then when the payments kind of stopped, they kind of reevaluated the whole situation and looked at it and would be like, hold on a minute, where did this $1.5 million valuation come from in the first place? And how much of the profits? Why can't I'd actually much rather not own the business and take the profits out now for myself rather than spend the next 10 years earning less than what I was earning as an architect to buy. What am I buying that's valued at 1.5 million? And then, start looking around at the rest of the company and be like, I don't even feel comfortable that this is a real business. What is it? What is it that we've actually just purchased? Am I now just funding the retirement of the previous owner at my own expense? And I don't know anything about running a business, and I don't even know if this was what I signed up for. Hold on a minute. I thought this was at just a kind of the next level of being a great architect. And that can be a very difficult situation to handle.
Yeah, it's sort of like you get married and then you discover the in-laws and you're like, well, why I did not sign up for this. We could tell a lot of stories about firm transition plans gone wrong. And so each one of these problems that we've talked about are problems that we've seen and problems that have come up. There's just so many ways that this thing can get sabotaged. So let's look for a minute at the possibility. What would it look like to succeed in this endeavor? Well, if you have a good transition plan set up, that means that you have people in the roles in the business that are handling all the business functions necessary for the business. You probably already have people, hopefully you have people covering the architectural functions. You also need to have redundancy other than yourself covering all the business functions. And the possibility here, what it means for you is you can do this at any time. Even if you're 5 years into the practice, you will benefit greatly by having a team in your practice right now. Let's say it's just 5 people where you do have those things covered, where you do have the ability to, if you wanted to, go work remotely in Switzerland for a month. If you wanted to take a couple weeks off, or heaven forbid, you needed to take care of a sick parent or something happens in the family that we hear happening more and more and more, impacting the business because this team hasn't been built. So it can be quite nice. That's probably an understatement. It can be quite amazing for a firm owner to have a practice that is transition ready, because there's immediate benefits to it. And then, of course, there's long-term benefits as well in terms of being bought out. If you're in the legacy, you want the firm to continue, then there's that opportunity as well. So really, if you can get past the problems that we just talked about, there really is a lot of upside to building a transition-ready firm. Now, there's some principles or mindsets that are going to have to happen here as well. And one of the mindsets is that no person is an island, and you are better off with a team than trying to be the sole person pushing everything forward.
I wanted to talk a little bit there about some of the things that we've seen with firms who have transitioned well or brought in powerful leaders, and the fulfillment and energy and love that they have for their business. And a lot of them migrate into this new role of being like a Yoda to the firm. And they're still taking out a salary. They're unplugged from all of so much of the day to day. They're not involved in the the kind of grind and production of inside of the projects. But they become they can in some cases become like an advisor to their own company, and they love it. They really, really enjoy it. Or we see firm owners taking a kind of creative director role, if you like. So their kind of ownership is diminishing. They've now got a CEO or a managing partner, and they're playing the game of a creative advisor to individual projects on the team, or they get to be the wise sage who has a lot of answers for the nourishment of the organization. But we see this role, or they become the face of the company, or they become like the sort of heritage superstar of the firm. And again, that can be a very enjoyable position. But there's a lot of freedom in what the next role might be as you're exiting, or when you're not the kind of sole owner anymore, or you're kind of letting go of your overall stake, and then there's a lot of pride and enjoyment and fulfillment that comes from just watching a team of leaders that you've cultivated absolutely crushing it. They're loving it. Everyone's making lots of money, and you're starting to pull back, and you've got a new role which is very fulfilling. I mean, I really enjoy it when we see our clients have that kind of experience.
Ryan, when you mentioned the Yoda example, I mean, that just resonates with me. I was born in 77. That was the first movie that I heard when I was in the womb, was Star Wars. And I just, out of curiosity, I put into ChatGPT here. So here's a little bit of comic relief, hopefully. I said, what would happen if an architecture firm owner was like Yoda? What are some things they might say to clients or staff? Do you want to hear a couple of the
Yeah, I see it.
the things they might say? Okay, so to clients, you might say, patience you must have to build something great. I like this one here. Here you go. Rushing leads to shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to regret. Here's a couple to staff or team. Let's see if I can find a good one here. Haste makes waste. Thoughtful every detail must be.
Was Yoda Indian?
Is that a comment on my Yoda voice, my Yoda interpretation? It's okay. My wife makes fun. She says every accent that I do sounds like someone from India. What can I say? Maybe it was a previous life. I'm not sure. Let's see. Here's another one. Here's a good one for the staff. If you can imagine the firm owner coming into the office with this. The force of creativity flows in all of you. Trust it, you should. We joke, but there is. I'm sure it's not going to appeal to everyone, but it will appeal to someone that want to take that mentorship role, that want to be able to unplug from the day to day, and
Mhm.
frankly, they do have a lot of wisdom they can share, whether it be in the voice of Yoda or not.
There's a lot of freedom with a good transition for you to design whatever role you want to have. You do it well. There's, that's really the name of the game. The business is there as a freedom vehicle. It's there as a wealth building vehicle for you and for your other team members, and a kind of well managed transition plan is a key part of that. Talking about the Smith Group, they were interesting. One of the things that the managing principals were saying in the podcast I did a little while ago about the success of the firm, or being able to manage a transition well, and obviously they've done it for over a number of generations, was the willingness to well, first of all, kind of reinvent yourself, and to look at the future and make a change to something, even when it wasn't, or it didn't appear not to be working. And I thought that was really interesting. So a kind of anticipation about what the future is going to be, and start to make changes, or start getting very clear on what the vision, or where the firm should start placing its energy, and start making those changes even when it looks like the business is, it's doing really well in this particular direction. But there was a willingness there to innovate.
So a bit contour in there. So even if it ain't broke, fix it.
Yeah. Because it's going to get broke, I think was the.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
It ain't broke.
That's a
It ain't broke
great.
yet.
That's a growth mindset.
Exactly. It was a growth long-term mindset, and it was a kind of willingness not to be overly attached to the status quo, not to get complacent. I probably think is the. I'm sure, obviously, there's things that work and they don't mess with it, but obviously,
They're like, we're going to start doing a different method of accounting. Instead of counting our expenses, who cares about expenses? We're just going to spend money willy-nilly and figure it out as we go.
You were going to use a duodecimal system of accounting.
Yeah, there we go. Bring back the abacus. These calculators are just really tiresome. I think we're too efficient now.
But in general, successful transition, I really think, business fluency, growth mindset, a systems mindset, having the ability to pull yourself out of being the bottleneck, establishing a number two. These are all things that really start to put you in a great position.
Absolutely. And another pitfall that we see so many times that firm owners make when they want to implement a transition plan is they think the transition is about calculating the value and determining how much the new people will buy in at. So they completely disregard the people aspect of the conversation and they just focus on the accounting. All I need to do is figure out how much my firm is worth. And then, hey, here's my firm. I want to sell it to my employees. But they completely miss out on everything that we just talked about at the beginning, which is the leadership aspect, which is, do people actually want it? Are they right role? Do their skill sets combined fit what's needed to replace you in the business? And so that is just, if you want a transition plan to fail, just focus on the financial aspects, just focus on the legal aspects. All that stuff needs to be figured out. Those are all very important aspects of a transition plan, but they're not the secret sauce that makes it successful. They are the agreements that you shake hands on after you have actually figured out all the details. You disagree, Ryan?
No,
I can see you scowling.
I think that's spot on.
I'm joking. Yeah. So, Ryan, any last thoughts as we wrap up this conversation?
Overall, again, just the business acumen and business fluency in a transition plan is so crucial. The identifying the right people take time. Just doesn't need to happen quickly. Like a transition plan can take 5 to 10 years in bigger firms. And that you can identify potential leaders early on and start grooming them, if you like. And that be clear that being a partner requires competency in these other domains. And it's not for everyone. You don't have to try and force everybody to become a partner. And likewise, if you're approached about being a partner, it's not necessarily the be all and end all of your career. And some architects are better suited in, developing a deep level of mastery in a particular niche. Other people are hungry and can be really great leaders. And you do the work on. If you're becoming a partner, I really encourage you to invest in yourself, in your communication, in your leadership, in your business knowledge and fluency, in your financial fluency. And it can be an extraordinarily rewarding path.
Yeah. And when we say invest in yourself, what we mean by that is, for instance, communication or leadership in a program like we offer here at Business of Architecture for firm leaders. That's the kind of investment we're talking about. It doesn't need to be with us, but that is what we mean when we say investment. We don't, look, you're your most important investment. So, watching YouTube videos on how to do a transition plan or listening to an Audible book about how to buy, sell businesses or how to be a better leader, that's like a toe in the water kind of investment. We're talking about believe in yourself, double down on yourself, be willing to put real money into your own training, into your own leadership, into your own communication, and it will only have positive benefits. Now, Ryan and I, knowing that this is a topic that is in a lot of people's minds, we've put together a guide for a transition-ready practice. And as a firm owner, we want to give the opportunity to go get that completely for free. Go to businessofarchitecture.com/transition ready. And there's actually a dash between those. So it's 2 words, transition-ready. Okay, so businessofarchitecture.com, transition-ready. In that guide, you'll discover the 6 top mistakes that sabotage transition plans from a people and leadership perspective. So you can make sure that you have those things covered. So whether or not you're actually ready to hand over the keys, you have a firm that is running with a self-directed, self-managed team.
And Here's today's Smart Practice Tooltip. As mentioned on today's episode, to download a free transition-ready guide that outlines the critical transition mistakes that many firm owners make and how to avoid them, go to businessofarchitecture.com/transition-ready. We'd like to acknowledge the following Smart Practice firms who've achieved 200 Club status. These firms have demonstrated exceptional client service and operational management to achieve a financial performance metric of $200,000 per full-time employee equivalent through the proper combination of people, process, power, and profit, as we teach in the Smart Practice method. To find out more about this prestigious award and how you can apply for recognition, go to businessofarchitecture.com/200. Our 500 Club winners are Drew and Justine Tyndall. Our 300 Club winner is Christopher Brandon. Our 200 Club acknowledgees are Marina Rubina, ODS, Brad Hubble and Suzanne Daly, Yost Bend and Denise Burkett, Judy and Larry Apple, Frank and Megan Lynn, Peter Spruance, Sven Levine, Andrea Nemechek. And thank you to those of you who left reviews for us recently on iTunes. Your reviews help others by helping them find this podcast so that this rising tide raises all boats. I'd love to acknowledge you here on the show. To do that, open up the podcast app on your iPhone, search for Business of Architecture, and after clicking on the show, scroll all the way to the bottom to leave a review.
Today's episode is sponsored by Gelt. Is your architecture firm just filing taxes or actually using them to grow the business? Gelt is your partner in optimizing your taxes so you can focus on scale. They work with you year-round, not just at tax time, taking a proactive approach that combines expert CPAs and powerful technology. From smart entity structures to overlooked deductions and smarter compensation planning, Gelt helps architecture firms unlock strategies most accountants miss. And exclusively for Business of Architecture listeners, Gelt is offering 10% off your first year. Don't wait for next tax season. Schedule your complimentary consultation at joingelt.com. That's JOINGELT.com to learn more and mention BOA when you sign up.
Today's episode of the Business of Architecture show is sponsored by Smart Practice, the world's leading step-by-step solution for small architectural practice owners that want to structure their existing practice so the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. Because you see, it likely isn't your architecture skills that hold you back. It's the business aspects of running a practice, managing projects and people, dealing with clients, contractors, and money. So if you feel like you're ready to quit doing things the old school way, you're ready to quit being a glorified administrator and get back to architecture again, go to smartpracticemethod.com to discover this simple business operating system that is revolutionizing small firm management. The views expressed on the show by our guests do not represent those of the host, and we make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment, except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.